What seemed like a perfect love story quickly plunged into darkness as Elowen Bennett uncovered a shocking secret hidden behind her mother's door. The sacred bond between a mother and husband turned into an unending nightmare. The affair between Galrun and Clementine not only shattered the family's happiness, but led to a horrifying tragedy. Behind the facade of perfection was a deadly deception that would make everyone pay with blood and tears. Elowen and Galrun Bennett's love like a dream. They met as undergraduates at Creekside College, Elowen, an ethereal and gifted art student, and Galrun, a charismatic business administration major with ambition as sharp as his suits. The first time Galrun saw her by the campus lake, he was captivated by her graceful presence, as if struck by lightning. Tall, magnetic, and brimming with charm, Galrun was determined to win her over. And win her he did, with his wit and promises of a bright future. Soon after graduation they married, the perfect couple poised to build a life in their picturesque hometown. Elowen became a beloved art teacher at the local high school, her passion for nurturing young talent winning the hearts of students and faculty alike. Meanwhile, Galrun, leveraging his family's influence, secured a prestigious position at a top investment firm. His meteoric rise through the ranks made him a local legend, admired for his success and drive. To the people of Creekside, the Bennetts were nothing short of royalty. They attended every gala, mingled with the elite at town council meetings, and their mansion in Oakwood Estates, purchased with Galrun's growing fortune, stood as a testament to their success. Elowen's artistic touch transformed their home into a work of art, with hand-painted murals and exquisite sculptures decorating every corner. They were the quintessential power couple, Galrun, the sharp businessman, Elowen, the creative force who softened the edges of their high-profile life. Yet beneath the polished exterior, cracks were forming. Years of heartache had taken a toll. Elowen and Galrun were unable to conceive, and the strain of fertility treatments weighed heavily on their once joyful marriage. Galrun buried himself in work, spending long hours at the office to escape the pain. Elowen found solace in her art and her students, but the distance between them only grew wider. During this difficult time, Elowen sought comfort from her mother, Clementine Corbin. A widow who had once been a globe-trotting photojournalist, Clementine had always been Elowen's rock. After her husband's death, she had retired to a quieter life on the outskirts of town, where she tended her garden and volunteered at the local animal shelter. Her free-spirited nature provided Elowen with a sense of stability in the storm. As Elowen leaned on her mother for support, Galrun, too, found himself drawn to Clementine's warmth. What began as innocent conversations during family dinners soon took a darker turn. Unbeknownst to Elowen, a dangerous attraction was building between her husband and her mother. It all began on a crisp autumn evening. Elowen was consumed with preparations for an upcoming art exhibition, her mind preoccupied with her work. Feeling neglected, Galrun decided to visit Clementine under the pretense of checking in on his mother-in-law. Though surprised, Clementine welcomed him with a glass of her homemade wine. In the cozy intimacy of her cottage, surrounded by mementos from her travels, Galrun opened up to Clementine. He confided his frustrations, the growing distance between him and Elowen, and the sadness that had settled in his heart. Clementine listened intently, her eyes soft with empathy. Perhaps it was the wine, or perhaps it was the shared loneliness, but that night a line was crossed. A touch lingered too long, a glance carried too much meaning. When Galrun left that evening, both knew that something between them had changed. What followed was a slow, dangerous dance of desire and guilt. They found excuses to see each other. Clementine needed help with home repairs, and Galrun suddenly developed an interest in gardening. Their secret meetings became a game of risk and passion, thrilling yet shadowed by the knowledge of their betrayal. While Elowen worked tirelessly on her art and clung to the hope of saving her marriage, Galrun and Clementine became ensnared in a web of lies that would soon shatter the Bennett family. The fairy tale that had once defined their lives was unraveling into a nightmare, with tragic consequences looming just beyond the horizon. As they sat in her cozy, cluttered living room, surrounded by souvenirs from her adventurous past, Galron felt himself opening up to Clementine in ways he hadn't with anyone. He spoke of his marital struggles, his frustrations, and the growing distance between him and Elowen. Clementine listened attentively. Her eyes, so much like her daughter's, softened with empathy. Perhaps it was the wine, the intimate setting, or simply the loneliness they both felt. But that night, a boundary was crossed. A lingering touch that conveyed more than comfort, a glance that carried unspoken desire. By the time Galron left, both of them knew that something between them had irrevocably changed. In the weeks that followed, they found excuses to see each other more often. Clementine suddenly needed help fixing things around the house, while Galron developed an unlikely interest in gardening. Their secret meetings were carefully orchestrated, timed perfectly to avoid any suspicion. During one of these encounters, Galron arrived to help repair a leaky faucet. The small, cramped space of Clementine's bathroom only heightened the tension between them. When their hands brushed accidentally, it sent a jolt through them both. Later, as Clementine reached past him, her perfume, an intoxicating blend of jasmine and vanilla, made Galron's heart race. Their eyes met in the mirror, and for a long moment, neither looked away. On another day, Clementine was showing Galron how to prune her roses. Standing behind him, her hands guiding his, their proximity was undeniable. The soft brush of her breath on his neck sent shivers down Galron's spine. When he turned to ask a question, their faces were inches apart, time seemingly suspended in the heat of forbidden desire. At a family gathering, they stole a few moments alone in the garden. Hidden behind climbing roses, their kisses were desperate, charged with the thrill of secrecy. When they heard Elowen's voice calling, they quickly pulled apart, the guilt heavy. But so was the excitement of their illicit affair. Their relationship quickly consumed them, their passion blinding them to the consequences. What began as fleeting physical attraction soon spiraled into something far more dangerous, a deep emotional entanglement. Clementine's once quiet, solitary bedroom became the stage for their betrayals. Every creak of the bed and every whispered confession felt like a symphony of their forbidden love. Their bond deepened, and they began to imagine a future together, oblivious to the destruction their dreams would bring to those around them. In the secrecy of their affair, they justified their actions with hushed conversations. Galron confided in Clementine how misunderstood he felt by Elowen, while Clementine revealed the depth of her loneliness since her husband's death. They convinced themselves that what they shared was special, a love that transcended the boundaries of convention. As the affair intensified, so did their lies. Galron fabricated business trips and late meetings, while Clementine invented illnesses to excuse herself from family events. Their communication became a series of secret emails and disposable phones, but with every lie, the weight of their deception grew heavier, looming like an inevitable storm they could not escape. The weight of their betrayal began to seep into every corner of their lives. Galron could no longer meet Elowen's gaze, his once confident demeanor now replaced with tension and guilt. Each time she asked about his day, his responses felt hollow and rehearsed, his voice betraying the strain of maintaining his lies. Clementine, too, felt the burden. Once warm and open with her daughter, she now found their conversations strained and uncomfortable. What had been a source of comfort and love for Elowen had become tainted by deceit, and Clementine felt powerless to stop the growing distance between them. She was ensnared not only by her affair with Galron, but by the paralyzing fear of what would happen if the truth were revealed. Despite their best efforts to keep their secret hidden, Galron and Clementine remained oblivious to the growing suspicions in Elowen's mind. The first crack in their facade appeared one dreary Tuesday afternoon when Elowen decided to surprise Galron with lunch at his office. Instead of finding him there, she was met by a confused secretary who informed her that Galron had left early for a client meeting. Though she brushed it off at the time, a seed of doubt was planted. Over the following weeks, Elowen began noticing subtle shifts in Galron's behavior. He seemed distracted, his mind frequently elsewhere during their conversations. His phone would buzz late into the night, and he would slip out to take calls in hushed tones. When questioned, Galron deflected with vague explanations about work stress and impending deals. Elowen's once joyful artistic sensitivity became her curse. She began noticing details that others might have missed: the faint scent of unfamiliar perfume lingering on Galron's clothes, a lipstick stain on a coffee mug he had brought home, and the way he sometimes recoiled from her touch, as if her presence was now unbearable. Each small observation built upon the last, forming an image she wasn't ready to face. At the same time, her relationship with her mother began to deteriorate. Clementine, once eager to spend time with her, grew distant and evasive. Their weekly tea sessions became rare, with Clementine often cancelling at the last minute, citing vague commitments. Even when they did meet, Clementine seemed tense, her gaze avoiding Elowen's, a stark contrast to the warm, comforting mother she had always known. As Elowen's suspicions of Galron grew, so too did her doubts about her mother. She found herself caught in a spiral of paranoia, questioning every interaction, analysing every word spoken by those she trusted most. Consumed by a need for the truth, Elowen quietly began her investigation. She pored over Galron's credit card statements, her heart pounding when she found unexplained charges at upscale restaurants and hotels he had never mentioned. Late at night, she would drive by her mother's cottage, her stomach sinking when she saw Galron's car parked down the street on nights when he was supposedly working late. Each discovery was like a knife twisting deeper, shredding the foundation of trust she had once stood on. Her colleagues and students noticed the change in her, the pale complexion, the dark circles under her eyes, the tremor in her hands as she worked. Each day, Elowen became a shadow of herself, torn between confronting the mounting evidence and clinging to the desperate hope that she was wrong. But the truth that awaited her was more devastating than she could have ever imagined. The day Elowen's world crumbled started like any other Saturday. She spent her morning at school, meticulously preparing for the student art exhibition. Galron had left early, mumbling something about a golf game with clients, though his words barely registered as she focused on her work. Later, feeling restless, she decided to stop by her mother's cottage for tea, hoping the visit would calm her frazzled nerves. As she drove up the familiar lane, her heart jolted. Parked behind Clementine's house was Galron's sleek black sedan, the car she'd seen in too many questionable places before. Elowen's pulse quickened, her grip tightening on the steering wheel. She desperately wanted to believe there was an innocent explanation, but a deep, unshakable dread told her otherwise. With trembling legs, she forced herself out of the car and approached the cottage. The curtains were drawn, but through a small gap she saw movement inside. Steeling herself, Elowen unlocked the door and slipped in quietly. What she saw would haunt her forever. There, on the worn floral couch, were Galron and Clementine, locked in an intimate embrace. Clementine's hair was dishevelled, Galron's shirt half unbuttoned, and two half-empty wine glasses stood on the coffee table like silent witnesses to their betrayal. Time seemed to stop. The only sound was the pounding of Elowen's heart. Then, sensing her, Galron and Clementine looked up, shock, guilt, and a flicker of defiance flickering across their faces. Chaos erupted. Elowen's scream shattered the silence as Galron scrambled for excuses. Clementine sat frozen, pale and tearful. But nothing could soothe the fury that erupted from Elowen as she hurled accusations at them. Their confessions, 6 months of deceit, beginning innocently they claimed, only deepened the wound. Overcome with rage and devastation, Elowen fled the cottage, leaving behind the wreckage of the life she had once known. She drove for what felt like an eternity, her mind spinning in endless loops, replaying the horrifying scene over and over. Hours passed, the sun sinking beneath the horizon, casting long shadows across the manicured lawn of the house she had once cherished as her sanctuary. When Elowen finally returned home, the darkness inside seemed to echo the emptiness she felt. She sat alone in the dimly lit living room, surrounded by the trappings of a life that once seemed perfect. But now, that illusion had shattered. The betrayal, the lies, the pain, it all hit her at once, crashing down like a tidal wave. In that moment, something inside her broke. Her grief solidified into a cold, steely resolve. Someone would have to pay for this. And Elowen knew exactly who that person would be. As the evening unfolded, the events leading to the fatal shooting were set in motion, each moment charged with unbearable tension. Elowen, lost in her torment, paced the house like a caged animal, her thoughts a swirl of rage and hurt. The ticking of the clock in the foyer seemed louder than usual, a taunting reminder of time slipping away. Time that would soon change everything. It was late when Galron finally returned home. He entered cautiously, his confident stride replaced with hesitant, careful steps. He seemed to sense the tension in the air. Elowen watched him from the shadows of the dining room, unseen as he hung up his jacket and loosened his tie. His familiar routine, something she had once taken comfort in, now filled her with revulsion, knowing what he had done. He called her name, his voice tinged with anxiety, and when she stepped into the light, he visibly recoiled. The woman standing before him was not the same vibrant, loving wife he had once known. Her eyes were hollow, rimmed with tears, her body trembling with barely suppressed fury. Galron, his face contorted with guilt and fear, began to stammer out apologies and excuses. He talked about feeling neglected, overwhelmed by work and their struggles with infertility. He called the affair a mistake, a moment of weakness that had spiraled out of control. But with each word, Elowen's fury only grew stronger, like a storm building inside her, rising with the force of all her shattered hopes. She barely registered what he was saying as she turned and walked toward his study. She knew Galron kept a gun in his desk, a precaution he had taken after a string of burglaries in the neighborhood. Without thinking, as if in a trance, she opened the drawer and pulled it out. The weight of the cold metal in her hands felt strangely grounding, a solid object in the midst of the chaos swirling inside her. When she returned to the living room, the sight of the gun in her hand caused Galron's face to drain of color. His eyes widened with shock and fear as he raised his hands and backed away slowly, pleading with her. His words came in a desperate rush, promises to end the affair, to go to counseling, to do whatever it would take to fix their marriage. But Elowen wasn't listening. All she could see were images of him and her mother, locked in their intimate betrayal, playing over and over like a twisted film reel in her mind. The next few moments were a blur of frantic movement and noise. Galron lunged forward, perhaps to disarm her, or maybe to plead for mercy. Instinctively, Elowen's finger tightened on the trigger, and the gun fired with a deafening roar that shattered the silence of the room. For a moment, everything seemed frozen. A picture frame fell from the wall, the glass shattering on the floor. Galron staggered backward, a look of shock etched on his face. He clutched his chest, where blood began to seep between his fingers, staining his white shirt a deep crimson. He collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath, his eyes locking with Elowen's in a final silent plea for help. The gravity of what she had done crashed over her like a wave, drowning her in horror and regret. The gun slipped from her fingers, clattering to the floor as she rushed to Galron's side, her anger evaporating in an instant. She pressed her hands against the wound, trying in vain to stop the bleeding, her hands slick with blood. His breathing grew weaker, his skin pale and clammy under her touch. With shaking hands, she grabbed her phone and dialed 911, her voice trembling as she gave the dispatcher their address. Tears streamed down her face as she pleaded for an ambulance, praying desperately that it wasn't too late. As she waited for help to arrive, she cradled Galron's head in her lap, whispering a mixture of apologies and pleas for him to hold on. The next few minutes felt like an eternity. Neighbors, alerted by the gunshot, began to gather outside. Through the window, Elowen could see curious faces peering in, their expressions shifting from concern to shock as they took in the scene. She heard muffled voices, someone shouting about calling the police. When the paramedics finally arrived, they worked swiftly to stabilize Galron. Elowen watched, numb with shock, as they loaded him onto a stretcher and rushed him to the waiting ambulance. As the sirens faded into the distance, Elowen found herself alone in the house, surrounded by the evidence of her actions. It wasn't long before the police arrived. Detective Ezra Hall took charge of the scene, her keen eyes taking in every detail as officers secured the area and began collecting evidence. Detective Hall approached Elowen, who sat motionless on the blood-stained couch. In a gentle but firm voice, Detective Hall informed Elowen of her rights and asked if she understood what had happened. Elowen, her voice barely audible, recounted the events of the day, the discovery of the affair, the confrontation, and the moment the gun went off. Throughout her statement, she seemed almost detached, as if she were describing something that had happened to someone else. As Elowen was led away in handcuffs, the gravity of the situation began to sink in. She caught glimpses of her neighbors watching from behind hastily drawn curtains, their faces a mix of horror and fascination. At the General Hospital, Galron Bennett clung to life in the intensive care unit. The bullet had missed his heart by mere inches, lodging dangerously close to his spine. As he underwent multiple surgeries, a steady stream of colleagues and family friends visited. Their hushed conversations in the waiting room filled with speculation and disbelief. Clementine Corbin, racked with guilt and shame, attempted to visit her son-in-law, but was turned away by the Bennett family. She retreated to her cottage, refusing to answer calls or open her door. The weight of her role in the tragedy seemed to age her overnight, her once vibrant demeanor replaced by a haunted, hollow-eyed look. Detective Hall, meanwhile, delved deeper into the case. She interviewed friends, colleagues, and family members, piecing together the events that had led to that fateful night. The more she uncovered about the Bennett family's history and the affair between Galron and Clementine, the more complex the case became. As the investigation progressed, public opinion in Creekside began to shift. What had initially been seen as a clear-cut case of attempted murder in a fit of rage was revealed to be a tragedy born of betrayal and shattered trust. The town found itself divided, with some sympathizing with Elowen's plight, while others condemned her actions as inexcusable regardless of the circumstances. One of the most crucial pieces of evidence came from an unexpected source, Elowen's best friend and fellow art teacher Zara. In the weeks leading up to the shooting, Elowen had confided in Zara, sending a series of text messages detailing her suspicions about Galron's infidelity. These messages laid bare Elowen's emotional unraveling, providing the court with a revealing glimpse into her troubled state of mind. They became a key factor in understanding her actions. In the packed courtroom, the tension was palpable as the trial began. The ambitious district attorney, Vincent Harding, painted a damning portrait of Elowen, portraying her as a woman driven by cold revenge. He argued that this was not a crime of passion, but a premeditated act, Elowen's calculated attempt to punish both her husband and mother for their betrayal. In contrast, Elowen's defense attorney Morales presented a different narrative. She portrayed Elowen as a victim of unbearable circumstances, pushed to the brink by unimaginable betrayal. Morales emphasized Elowen's impeccable reputation, her contributions to the community, and the immense emotional distress she had been under. She argued that Elowen's actions stemmed from overwhelming anguish, not malice. As the jury deliberated, the courtroom remained hushed, the entire town of Creekside holding its breath. After 3 tense days, the jury returned with their verdict: guilty of aggravated assault, a lesser charge than the attempted murder the prosecution had sought. The judge, recognizing Elowen's previously spotless record, sentenced her to 5 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 3, along with mandatory counseling. The decision sparked mixed reactions. Some felt the sentence too lenient, others saw it as fair. Galrun, scarred by the ordeal, quietly moved out of state, and Clementine retreated into isolation, her once vibrant spirit now dimmed by guilt and grief. As Creekside slowly heals and life moves forward, the tragic story of Elowen, Galrun, and Clementine serves as a stark reminder of how quickly lives can unravel through betrayal and deception. It teaches us the importance of safeguarding the trust we build with our loved ones and recognizing the profound consequences our choices can have. This story challenges us to reflect on our own relationships and the value of honesty and communication. What lessons do you take from this tragedy? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more thought-provoking stories.